The Serbian Empire. I know it doesn't show up very good, but on the very bottom here is Greece. Over there, Hungary did not exist yet. To the north, it would go all the way to the tip to Austria, which did not exist yet. So that Serbian Empire, gosh, that's a terrible map. Doesn't do you much good. You can just see the edge of Italy coming out over here. Does that help you get your bearings? Okay, so it was a huge empire in the known world. So we'll get to the rest of that stuff in a little bit. The foundations of empires was the emperor. So kings and queens. The idea of nation-state was not yet developed in the world. So if you had, there's no such thing as the United States of America. So they were ruled by kings and emperors. There was an early king who brought together those Serbian tribes, and his name was Nemanja. And he was the king, and that really got the kingdom of Serbia going. Something interesting happened. A king has to have a son to be his heir. The king's oldest son ran down to a monastery and became a monk. Uh-oh. There goes the kingdom. No, he had two other sons. But his oldest son went and became a monk. That oldest son, well, his dad was pissed off. So the king sent all the troops, a whole bunch of horsemen, to this monastery to go get his son back. Well, the son ran up in the tower and cut off his hair, because long hair was a sign of royalty. Because that meant you could wash your hair, you had bath regularly and all that stuff. So he cut off his hair and took his clothes and threw it down from the tower, said to the horsemen, "Go and tell the king that his son is dead." And cutting the hair was also part of the monastic tonsure. When a man becomes a monk, they cut off his hair. And so for 10 years, this prince was in the monastery. He didn't come out. But at the end of 10 years, he came out with a mission to christen the entire Serbian Empire. So all these lands didn't know Christ yet. Remember, pagan. And this one man, the prince monk, who took on a monastic named Sava, S-A-V-A. This guy named Sava came out of the monastery to go christen the entire empire. First one he went to was his dad. His dad. Because once you get the king on board, everything goes smoother. Well, the dad was hesitant, but became a Christian. And then you have the whole wealth of an empire launching a christening program. Imagine all your tax dollars going to church. Empires always collect taxes. Imagine your tax dollars going to build churches, to build monasteries, to build orphanages, to build hospitals. All these things as part of the christening campaign to make Christ available. And so the empire just blossomed because all of a sudden you gain a moral ethic that grows a nation. In other words, the saying is, if you have a culture with no God, you don't have a culture. Because you don't have a moral ethic. The definition of a society is a group of people with a common moral ethic. That's the definition of a society. If you don't have a God in your society, you don't have a common moral ethic. And you have the decay, breakdown of the culture. We see that a little bit in North America right now, where nobody trusts anybody. You don't know what the rules are. Or you only rely on the law to keep you safe. Well, that only works if there's a policeman around, right? So once you gain a moral ethic, then the blossoming of a culture happens. And that moral ethic was dictated by Orthodox Christianity. because that's the kind of monk Saint Sava was. And so they christened the entire empire from Greece all the way up to Austria. And there's still that same Orthodox Christianity. 95% of the whole nation is still Orthodox Christian. So it worked. And people ask me, when the king became a Christian, did he really? Or did he just kind of pick it up because he thought, we need some kind of God, let's go with that one? Or there's a couple things that really tell. I would say, if you want to know if someone's become a true Christian, you look to their pocketbook and their bedroom. Those where the rubber meets the road, right? Pocketbook in the bedroom. The king eventually became a monk. And his wife became a nun. And they lived separate. And the king died in a monastery on a straw mat with a rock for a pillow. He gave up all the wealth of the entire Serbian empire and died on a straw mat. And to me, that means he was sincere. He didn't die in the lap of luxury. He gave it all to God. So that's a kind of fortitude that's a foundation for a great nation. When someone's giving up their life for the sake of others. They're giving up their money for the sake of others. Give up all that tax money as opposed to see how much of it you can grab. And that's the foundation of that Serbian nation. The prince, monk, and his dad, the now monk. So keep those two men in mind. The king died, and he took on the monastic name, Simeon. He gave up his ruling name. Imagine giving up yourself and your whole name and everything you've crafted around it. He gave it all up. And so his name is Simeon. And Saint Sava is canonized saint. Saint Sava, the prince, was the first archbishop of all Serbia. So that's the foundation. You see that culture and the religion and church. And when you transition, when you take your emperor and the prince becomes your archbishop, and he becomes your religious leader, can you see that transition? It'd be like, who's a big sports fan? I don't know who your favorite sports figure is. Michael Jordan or who knows what. But if you were following that person, and then they became your religious leader, can you see that shift? Whatever it is the person you follow in life, if they were to become your religious leader, it would transform 1,000 people around them. Does that make a little sense? And that's the foundations of that Serbian culture. It's linked to Orthodox Christianity, and all the way back to the beginning. Any questions so far? Yes?
What year did all this happen?
Oh, this happened, we're probably looking at the cultural start around the 900s, 8 to 900s, depending on when you count those tribes as becoming something other than tribes. And that's a tough one to guess. But about the time you find history, it's around the 900s, 8 to 900s, when you find that name of the king and his lineage. So 8 to 900s. Good question, good question. Any more questions? Free to ask. We're going to move on a little bit more. Now you got a taste for the beginnings. We're going to talk a little bit about art, music, food, and things like that. To give you a little bit of foundation on Serbian people and their culture. You know when they were all being christened? That whole nation, that's a big work, a lot to do. It was village by village. Well, you don't just wake up one morning and say, I want to be a Christian. Because you don't even know who Christ is. So someone has to bring it to you. And so when someone would bring Christ to a village, and they would voluntarily accept it, they would be very thankful to that person. In fact, they would teach their kids to be thankful to that person that brought you Christ. And then they would adopt that person as their patron saint. And so every village in Serbia has a patron saint, the person who brought them Christianity. And they've taught their kids to keep that name and be thankful for it. Does that make a little sense? Some people have a personal namesake, a Christian name. Anthony, St. Anthony, Mark, St. Mark, Peter, St. Peter. The whole family would take on a patron saint. And then that celebration, they have a family patron saint day. That's called a Slava. S-L-A-V-A, Slava. And to this day, every family celebrates their family patron saint day. And the whole family gets together from wherever they are, and they draw together, and they remember that line in the sand that was drawn over 1,000 years ago when their family was not Christian, and then they became Christians. And they keep that for the last 1,000 years, remembering that we are baptized. We are Orthodox Christians. We have been since that saint brought us faith. And so they have that family celebration of, literally, they call it their baptismal glory. In other words, they'd still be pagans today if it wasn't for that. And they're connected, the celebration connects them in 1,000 years to all their ancestors. Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, to step out of that lineage would be to walk away from 1,000 years of consistent, consecutive Christianity. Does that make sense? And then this generation grafts in their children and shows them their lineage and celebrates. You're baptized. You've been Orthodox Christians for over 1,000 years. And they mark it with a big celebration, with a big feast. So some of what I show you will be that feasting that the Serbians do for their patron saint day. And let's move on a little quicker. There's music involved with feasting, but I'm going to go a little bit on language. Language, have you heard the Cyrillic alphabet? Anyone seen those funny letters? Okay, Cyrillic, not too good, but Cyrillic, does anybody know where it came from? Very good. I could tell someone's been to Macedonia or Montenegro. These two Greek brothers, they lived on the border of Greece and the pagan Serbians, the Slavs. So they spoke both languages. They realized that the northern Slavic people had no alphabet, and they invented one based off of Greek. They added some more letters. They artificially invented letters, because the Slavic people make noises that the Greeks don't. In other words, there's, you know the letter J, J? That sound's not made in Greek. And if you say it in Serbian, you add the Z to it, J. J is not in Greek. And all sorts of sounds like that the Greeks didn't pronounce. So they added some extra letters, and they literated the Slavic people. Do you know why? One purpose: to bring them the gospel. Cyril was a priest, a monk priest, and Methodius, his brother, was a monk. Two brothers living on a border, bringing Christianity to their neighbors. Little did they know, it would lead to the baptizing of 100 million people. 100 million people. And that's Cyril and Methodius. I gave us Cyrillic. That's a little picture of Cyril and Methodius. So a couple brothers. One's a monk. Now, they lived in hard times. They lived in hard times. You have to realize the Roman Catholic Church wanted everything done in Latin. Ooh. What are these two guys doing? They're doing everything in church in the Slavic languages. It's called Old Church Slavonic. It wasn't old at that time. They were doing it in the vernacular. That didn't go too good with Rome, who wanted Latin. There was something called linguistic imperialism. If you can impose a language on people, you capture them. Linguistic imperialism. And the goal was to have Latin be a universal language so you could capture everybody. Cyril and Methodius, they said, we speak Greek. And Christianity is much more an Eastern religion than Latin. And they couldn't see any reason for Latin as a foundation for Christianity. The first 3,000 Bibles were written in Greek. And it's just not there. And the Hebrews did not force the Greeks to speak Hebrew. You see what I'm saying? They could not rationalize this oppressive force for Latin language, and so they christened the Slavs in their native tongue. Does that make a little sense? It didn't go over well. Although, by the end of their life, I think when Cyril was sick and dying, at the very end of his life, Rome kind of said, okay, I guess you did good. And then after he died, they proceeded to try to press Latin on everybody to be baptized. So there's a little antagonism there. It doesn't go easy. Okay, let's go to music. Well, let's go over here. Someone asked about iconography. I'll save Vladimir for later. That's a church in Butte, currently. And I'll slide through this show pretty quick. If I do this. That's the inside of the Butte church. Those are icons, images. An icon is another word for image in Greek. That's all. Literally, word for word. In the Bible, it says, thou shalt not make graven images. Graven in Hebrew means carved. You know when Moses came down from the mountain with the Ten Commandments? And the Hebrew people were worshiping what? Not a cow. Not a calf. Not a golden calf. I'll be more specific. It was a statue of a golden calf. So to speak, the commandments were already broken before he came down. Thou shalt not make graven images. No carved images. It was already bad from the time he got down. You'll never find in an Orthodox church any statuary. Never. If you turn the next page in the Bible, it says, how shall you then adorn the temple and the altar of God? And it says, with holy images. Oh, so things that are not statuary. And it says, with what? And it says things like angels and cherubim and seraphim. And for a Christian, that would be the life of Christ that we depict. But no statuary. So that's a little bit of, that's the Butte iconography.
When was that church built?
The Butte local one, the parish is about 112 years old. They got about 50 years out of the first temple that was here uptown, and that one's about 50. So that one was built about 1965. That's a little expanded view of the inside. Now, somebody asked me a question about the flat. How come it's two-dimensional? Who asked that? It's not two-dimensional. That was a mistake made in Elizabethan England when they were thinking North America. They were thinking Western-minded people are the center of the world. It's three-dimensional. Does anybody in here do art? Somebody, a little bit of art? Let me go really quick. If I had a painting right here in front of me in a canvas, in Western art, if they painted power poles on that painting, they'd get smaller towards the back, right? If you had a river, it'd be wide up front and get small towards the back, like into a sunset. We call that, it gives a nice vista, a nice perspective, nice to muse at. I call our Western culture a pass the popcorn culture. We like to spectate. Now, ready for the switch? Eastern art, mind you, Christianity is basically Eastern, so what is art? Eastern art takes the vanishing point from behind the piece of art. In Western, you put the vanishing point behind the canvas, right? Imaginary vanishing point that all the lines of geometry point towards. Eastern art takes it from behind the canvas to our side, the viewer's side of the canvas. Does that make a little sense? It is three-dimensional, but the dimension is on the opposite side. And so I put this picture up to show you. This is in our church in Butte. Can you see that the dimensional lines get smaller towards the front? That's the opposite of what we're used to. In Western art, it would fade away in the back. Right? The vanishing point is right about over here. Can you see that? Can you notice that it's different? And the reason it's like that is because it's supposed to be experiential. It's participatory. In the West, people spectate. Have you ever had someone spectate at you? As opposed to treat you like a person. One is interactive and dynamic. This is much more interactive than when you first walked in, right? As opposed to people just spectating. I asked the artist who painted these icons, do you know how to paint with a Western perspective? He said, yeah, it's easy. I said, well, why don't you? He said, because people would just look at it. They would not experience and participate. We're back to that Eastern mindset, that those things you do are experiential and participatory. If you want to know about God, you have to experience and participate in Him, not just have it explained to you. This shows it real overt, how sharp those geometric lines are. Can you all see that? So I hope that answers your question about iconography. That's Mary, the Mother of God. She just gave birth. That's in the cave. Those are the angels. That's a bigger picture of the whole scene. Can you see it? That's the baptism of Christ. That's Lazarus being raised out of the tomb. That's Palm Sunday, coming on the donkey. Are you going too fast, or is that okay? That's the crucifixion. That's the resurrection. Now, I could not have turned pages of a Bible that quick. Images convey more and convey it faster than words on a text. So they're more functional in conveying the gospel to a bunch of people who can't read. You know, most of history, most people cannot read or write. And so this I call scripture in color and ink. Sometimes I call it biblical literature for the non-reader. More Christians have learned their faith from iconography than from the Bible. Most Christians have never read the Bible historically. Illiterate. Paper is a new invention. Printing press, only 500 years old. So you got 1,500 years of Christianity with no printing press. So this is biblical literature for the non-reader. A little bit more on Serbian culture. We're going to jump venues. Has anyone heard of Nikola Tesla? That's a picture of him. He's credited with modern electricity. If the other guy had his way, I think it was Thomas Edison or Graham Bell, we'd be on DC current instead of AC current. He invented the modern induction motor, electric induction motor. The Tesla car has all the things that Tesla invented in it. Anybody know this guy? He's the world champion tennis player, Novak. Yep, so that's Serbian culture. I'm going to move on a little bit now. Oh, these are out of order, so excuse me. Oh, that's terrible. Oh well. That's a Serbian flag of sorts. The red, the blue, and the white is a Serbian flag. Can you see those 4 C's? In Serbian, they have words attached to them, and they mean only unity will save the Serbs. Only by hanging together. Can you see some connection to the Slava, the family patron saint? Only unity will save the Serbs, and it has a cross, because that only happens in Christ. If you hang together without Christ, you're lost. You have to hang together in Christ. The Battle of Kosovo, that's a bad picture. That was no better. Let's do music. This is one of the musical instruments that they use in Serbia. It's called a gusla. It's a one-string violin type. And they squeeze on it and bend the notes just by squeezing and bending the tune on that one string. So they're able to get notes that are in between notes. The music in Serbia, it's not on their standard scale. You know that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti? That doesn't happen everywhere. There's something called a Dorian scale, where it goes do, re, mi, but when you run it the other way, there's a flatted note. And so instead of la, 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 it'll be la, 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 flat, and then continue. So music has a flat note in it. And you can hit that with this. I'm jumping around a little bit. This man was instrumental in Serbia and culturally. He took the whole alphabet and he took away all the exceptions, all the irregular things. Every sound is connected to only one letter. Once you learn the alphabet, you have no spelling tests. Every letter has only one sound. Do you know what I'm talking about? How many different ways are there to spell the sound sh in English? Come on, give me more than 3. Ocean. There's 13 different ways to spell the sound sh in English. There used to be that kind of thing going on in the Serbian language. This guy did away with all of it. He said one letter, one sound. He didn't change the language. He modified the alphabet. It's completely phonetic. There's no exceptions. They spend less time in school with language. And they give an extra hour a day to math and science. They're beating us in math and science because they don't have spelling quiz. They don't have to teach kids how to spell double letters. Or T-I-O-N. What's that have to do with sh? You know, they don't have to teach them that stuff. They spend an extra hour a day from all their life in science and math. So they beat us in math and science. Tesla. That's the guy. His name is Vuk, by the way. And that means a wolf in Serbian. That's that flag again with the C's, the 3 C's. This is some of the Serbian food. I wanted to get to the food. That's a patron feast. That's that Slava bread. Oh, I'm going kind of fast because we're running out of time. Flutes are common in Serbia. Flutes. And so they would also add a flat note when they drilled the holes in the flute so they could play on a Dorian scale. That's a little foreign to some of you. This man, his name is, well, he's the founding priest of the Butte Parish. The founding priest. His name is Father Sebastian Dabovic. He was just canonized last September as a saint. So Butte has Saint Sebastian as their founding priest. Those are shoes that they call opanka. That's a style of shoe that the Serbians used to wear. This man is a Russian. He's from Russia. He's a bishop. His name is Tikhon. Remember, Butte was the outpost? Did you know that Russia is almost closer than Serbia? Because Alaska was owned by the Russians, right? Alaska was all Russian Orthodox. The bishop came down, consecrated the Butte Montana parish. He went back to Russia, became patriarch of all Russia. And then came the communists. And he had to give his life for his faith in leading the Russian people not into communism. And he's been canonized as saint, Saint Tikhon. So the founding priest and the consecrating bishop are both saints in Butte. Moscow, for the 100-year anniversary of the Butte Parish celebration, 100 years, Moscow sent relics of St. Tikhon. They reside in the church. Relics, little pieces of his bone. So we have some of St. Tikhon right here in Butte. St. Sebastian, newly canonized, his relics will be arriving soon. So look for a big feast of reuniting the two saints who founded the Butte Parish. And we will have his relics here available for veneration. That's a povatitsa, some of the food. Anybody recognize it? A sweet nut roll. This is a baklava that the Serbians make. That's not a very good picture. Oh, we're back to the alphabet. Music again. The tambura, tamburica they call it, tambura. It's 4 to 5 string instruments. They play with a little bit of umpapa, kind of a cross between the umpapa and Mexican mariachi, kind of. These are called priganica, some more food. It's a kind of a Serbian donut hole. And it's not a dessert. It's an appetizer to be had with brandy before dinner. So you do these and have a brandy chaser. Oh, you can't see that good. Those are called cevapes. These are rolled up pork and veal, and they make these little hand-packed sausages. I'll get another picture. I have to talk about Kosovo. Kosovo. Anybody heard about Kosovo? Monumental in Serbian culture. Why? The Ottoman Turks, after they conquered Greece, came up to Serbia around the 1400s. There was one place in Kosovo where the Turks had the Serbians outnumbered, gosh, like 7 to 1. And the Turks came to the Serbians and said, if you surrender, we'll make all of you into sultans, and you can stay in your home and continue to rule your own people. Just come under Islam, and you get everything. So the Serbians went back that night, they talked it over, they made a monumental decision. Critical for all of Europe, by the way. The one reason why Europe is not Islamic happened because of Kosovo. The Serbians decided and it touches me. Better to give up the earthly kingdom offered by the Turks and go and die in favor of the heavenly kingdom, that the crowns in heaven could not compare to wearing the hat of a sultan. So they knew they were outnumbered, at least 7 to 1. And that night, they all decided to go to battle and die. So they took a stand for Christianity. They took a stand for Christianity. But the kill rate was amazing. The Serbians were killing 10 to 1. They were slaughtering the Turks. The Turks had never seen men fight like that with no fear. And the Serbians, in fact, even though they were outnumbered 7 to 1, at the end of the battle, it was a stalemate. It was a stalemate. And the Turks stubbed their toe so hard in Kosovo, they thought, if the rest of Europe is like this, we can never conquer them. That these few men are insurmountable, and they gave their life. First one to give his life was the Prince of Serbia. Not the one from long ago, but the current one. His name was Lazar, and he led the battle, and he died for his people. Something else happened at that battle. As the Turks were coming to the north, there was a young prince, a baby, an heir to the throne. And they hid the baby, because they knew he'd be killed. They hid the baby in the nettles. You know what nettles are? A stinging bush. Because they knew the Turks wouldn't go in the nettles to get a crying baby. Because it hurts. and they hid the baby king in the nettles. After the battle, they went and retrieved the baby, and nobody used the king's proper name. Do you know what they called the baby? Nettles. Nettles. And it was code, secret code. All the Serbians knew when you hear about the young man named Nettles, you know that he's heir to the throne. Do you know how to say Nettles in Serbian? No? Koprivica. Anybody heard that name around you? Now you know a little more about Serbian culture and how it's kept. That was a big battle. The other thing that came out of that battle was epic poetry. Poetry like you can't believe, that describes this thing I just tried to give you a taste of. Do you accept the truce? Do you take the wealth and the power of Islam? Or do you give up your life and die in battle and keep the crowns that are prepared for you by God in all the heavenly kingdom? And there's epic poetry that goes on and on and on. And Serbians are known for memorizing poetry. So they would memorize these long, long poetic stories that they would tell their children and tell their children. Even after the Ottoman Turks came over and took over all of Serbia, Serbia was occupied by the Turks, by the Muslims, for 400 years. They were not allowed to worship for 400 years. Today, 95% of Serbia is Orthodox Christian. Can you see that steadfastness? Would our country be good after 400 years? Or have we almost given up Christianity after 200? You see what I'm saying? How do they keep their faith? In their homes, they would celebrate their patron saint day. And the family got together, and they would all reinforce, you are baptized. We always have been. You are a Christian. We always have been. Islam could not penetrate that. Islam could not for 400 years. Then there was a Serbian uprising and they threw the Turks out, and they're still intact today. And they say, as if nothing happened. That the Turks just came in for a little while. We shall persevere beyond our generational knowledge to the next generation. I may die, but you shall live, and we shall meet together in the kingdom of heaven. You cannot give up your faith. Can you see that linkage? I mean, today people have a hard time giving up an hour to go to church on Sunday, right? We don't know what it means to live under Islam. We don't know. So that's part of the epic poetry in Serbian culture, is that fortitude in Kosovo. And they call Kosovo the very heart of Serbia. When the U.S. forces were dismantling Kosovo and calling it Muslim, it was a disgrace to history when they knew this was the heart of Christianity in all of Serbia. Do you know what I'm talking about? How can you possibly say Kosovo is not Serbian when their blood is all over the ground? So that's a little bit about Kosovo. Yeah.
What time frame was that battle?
That battle was 1460-ish. 1460, I think. I'm terrible with those kind of things.
Sure.
Yeah. So 400 years later, in 1803, when Serbia got out from under the Ottoman yoke. Thereabouts. Feasting, back to that slava. It's normal to cook a couple roasted lambs or pigs, because if you have celebration, you give your best. This is that Prince Lazarus who gave his life at Kosovo and led his people into the kingdom of heaven. Again, when a prince gives up his kingdom for the sake of God, you kind of hear that St. Sava story again. Another prince who became a monk, gave up his life. This is some more of the food. That's not a good picture. This is some of the baklava. Serbians often put some pistachios on top of their baklava. That's what that green stuff is. That's St. Tikhon, the Russian bishop who consecrated Butte. Meats. The Serbians love their meats. At every slava, there'll be 3 meats served. If it's a big feast, you have 3 meats. Chicken, pork, and lamb. And maybe beef if you can't get one of those. Always 3 meats. There's a huge church in Belgrade erected for St. Sava. That's a picture of it. This is a cabbage roll. That's another food. I think I have a better picture of cabbage. That's cabbage rolls. Cabbage stuffed with meat. There's a pig. These are those shoes, those opanka. I'm going quick because we're almost out of time. This is some more of those cevaps, a hand-packed, no skin on the sausage. That's standard Serbian dress. That's how they would dress. Wool pants, things like that. That's a slava bread. That's the patron saint bread. They make this bread, and then they have the priest over, and the priest blesses it, and all the family gathers together, and if you can't reach the bread to touch it, then everyone puts their hand on their shoulder, and they spin this bread around, and they sing this song about the holy martyrs who gave their life for Christ. And then there's another song about the Holy Trinity. And then there's another song about Christ. They sing these 3 songs, and it's a para-liturgical act. This is not liturgy, this is not Mass. But there's bread, and there's wine, and there's a blessing, and there's a whole group together. Imagine, you can't have your faith because of the Turks. This is as close as you can get. Does that make sense? They kept a para-liturgical act to keep their faith. This is the oldest picture of that Saint Sava, the Prince King who became a monk. Cut off his hair. Can you see the top of his head is bald? That's a little picture of him. He looks kind of Serbian, huh? That's just some more food and feasting on a feast day. Oh, can you see how they're all gathered around? This is the bread in the middle with the priest and everyone, the whole family connected, focusing on that para-liturgical faith. That's just more meats. That's the monastery where St. Sava went to and threw his hair down and told the king his son is dead. That monastery is still here today. Battle of Kosovo, not a good picture. Sorry about those. Sarma, you know what Sarma looks like. They also boil wheat for the memorial service. We boil wheat and then sweeten it. You have to boil it about 4 hours. Then you add honey and sugar and spice it. And we say our memorial prayers for the departed. And then eat the wheat after it's been blessed, to specifically remember the promise of God, that as a grain of wheat must fall, die and fall into the ground before it can rise again. So rather than just think about the resurrection and the promise, we make the wheat and taste the sweetness of the promise of God. So on a Slava, celebration of your baptismal glory, you remember all your relatives back for 1,000 years in the memorial. There's that Kosovo maiden searching for her loved one on the battlefield. They call it the battlefield the Blackbirds, because when the women came to look for their husbands, blackbirds were coming and pecking on all the dead bodies. And so this one found her husband. That's just an old Serbian man. There's that crest again. Vladimir, Lakers, another contemporary. And then I think that's all the way around. I think that's it for today. I hope I didn't keep you too long. Oh. I left out one thing, and this is just a little add-on because then I have to let you go because brown bag lunch has to finish. You know that the young prince became a monk and cut off his hair, and later his dad became a monk. They buried him in a monastery, and this is his tomb. And we got to go visit it just a few years ago. And at his tomb, for the last 1,000 years, it's been emitting oil, fragrant oil called myrrh. Now, the Ottoman Turks, when they came in, and came into this monastery, the Turks were being healed miraculously by this oil. Thousands of Turks were becoming Christians at the foot of this man's tomb in the monastery. Thousands. And the Ottoman Empire hated it. Here we're sending people north to conquer, and they're becoming Christians. They didn't like it. And even after the war, the Serbian people would take care of the Muslim widows and orphans, because the Ottoman Empire didn't. You know, because a woman was nothing if you don't have a man of the household. So the Serbian people would take care of the people who conquered them, take care of their widows and orphans. And those Muslim people had never seen such love before. Never. And again, thousands and thousands of people became Orthodox Christians who used to be Muslims, just by a Serbian doing what the gospel tells us to do. Love those who hate you. Let us call brother even those who hate us. And so the Serbians do that. Serbian hospitality is known to this day. You don't leave a widow, even if they're your enemy. You don't leave an orphan just because they're your conqueror. So the life support system that cares for the needy, even under the Ottoman yoke, was the Serbian people. And that's how they christened a whole bunch of Muslims. At the foot, the tomb of this former king that emits myrrh, it gives off myrrh. And a short story, when we were there was another man with us, and he just had this terrible migraine. And he walked over to this place, he didn't know what it was. He walked right next to the tomb. He didn't know what it was. And he smelled the smell, and he went over and he placed his hand on the tomb, right on the top of this thing right here, and his headache went away completely. Splitting migraine gone. And he didn't know what. He didn't know how. So he came over to me, because that guy doesn't speak Serbian, doesn't read or write Serbian. And he says, what just happened? He says, it smells beautiful over here. I don't know why. It smells like something I've never smelled, and I feel great. And so we went over there, and I said, oh, this is over 1,000-year-old tomb of the former king, now Saint Simeon, the myrrh flower. That's the honest to God story, current day. That's a little bit about Saint Simeon. Yeah, questions. Let's go questions.
Where is that monastery?
That monastery, that's a modern picture of Saint Saba. If you have to leave, that's okay. I know you have work and things like that. This will just be question and answer. The monastery is in a place called Mount Athos. It's right on the border of Greece and Serbia. It's actually a peninsula that sticks out of Greece. It's only for men. The entire place, the whole 23 square miles, only monks and men. There's 20 monasteries on it. So it's, if a man's going to be a monk, that's where you go. And so they took him there because he was a monk. Good question. Good question. More questions. There's a lot more to the culture. That's all we could do in 45 minutes. Yes?
Yeah, in 1918, about May 12, 13, 14, it was 200 Serbian guys actually they were taken to Europe. They went to Canada from Butte. They had a big celebration here. All their names were listed. And I've looked for proof that the ones who ever came back.
Did they go to war?
Yep.
I have to add a little more, if you're up for history, more modern history. You know, World War I was started in Serbia. Yay! There was a young Serbian man, he assassinated the Austro-Hungarian leader and started World War I. And so that's the beginning of World War I. I don't know anything about those men, those 200.
They list all of the names, and I tried to find them when they came back, and I don't know. You know, the Serbian army lost, they were the highest percentage of killed in World War I, was 39% compared to Americans.
Yeah, they gave their life.
Yeah.
Those same lines, World War II. World War II. Again, remember Serbia is battling with the Allied forces. Serbians on the same side as the U.S. Terrible. Serbia took the brunt. You've heard of Auschwitz. Did you know there were 3 death camps in Serbia? 3. And they weren't there to kill the Jews. They were German supported, but no Germans were there. And this is a rough part of history, so I hope it's not too rough for lunch. But if you know about Auschwitz, the Croatians ran those 3 death camps. And Germany enabled them. Germany enabled them and said it's for killing Jews. And they didn't kill many Jews there. There were over 500,000 Serbians exterminated. They were the more graphically ruthless extermination camps, worse than Auschwitz. Worse than Auschwitz. So that's, if you want to look up history, just Wikipedia, something called Jasenovats. Starts with a J, like Jan Senovats. And it's the death camps that the Croatians set up to kill the Serbians. And they literally said, what should we do with the Serbians? Well, they asked the Germans, what do you do with the Jews? And they said, well, we go to the final answer, you just kill them. And so the Croatians said, our campaign is 1/3 of the Serbians we plan to drive out of their country. 1/3 we plan to convert to Catholicism. And 1/3 we just plan to kill, to teach the rest that they better do the other 2. And so that's the execution. If you look it up on Wikipedia, it's more graphic than I want to go into. They were more harsh. There were Croatian, Roman Catholic, Croatian death camp men who would brag about how many Serbians they killed in one day by hand with a knife. And the leader of the pack killed 1,000 a day. Second place was killing 600 a day. So, I mean, it's harsh, but when you talk about giving your life for the war effort, which is what you were talking about, you find that these death camps, 3 of them in Serbia, not publicized. You won't see it publicized in North America, by the way. Do you know why? 25% of the U.S. is Roman Catholic. Last thing you want to do is say that Italy was in bed with Germany, and you had Roman Catholic Croatians killing Orthodox Christians. It's not politically correct to say it, and I just say it, and it kind of stings. It stings me to say those words. But that's not something that's popular. You won't see it in any catechism book, I'll put it that way. It's a piece of history that just gets forgotten. So that's war effort. Now the other thing the Serbians did for the Allied forces, when Germany would shoot down some of our airplanes, the Serbians would go find the pilots who had parachuted out, bring them into safety, and hide them at their own risk. And when the Germans came looking for the downed plane, they wouldn't say anything. They'd hide the Americans and usher them to a port where they could get them back to the U.S. So I don't know if you've heard about the Serbian helping the Allied airmen, but that one's pretty well known. So we've been with the U.S. for a long time as Serbians. But good question. You have another question over here.
Well, I was just wondering, your tours of the church.
Tours of the church, yeah. We do tours of the church. Sorry about that graphic on the Auschwitz-style death camps, but it's real. 500,000 people died. We do church tours. Just call the church. I live 10 feet behind the church. Anytime you want, we'll come to it. Anytime you want. It's pretty handy. Church tour takes about 2 hours. About 2 hours. But we can make it shorter. Yeah.
Are there other monasteries in that in North America? I believe I visited a place out of Phoenix that
Yes.
really seems to fit into what you have said here today.
There's a place in Phoenix, a men's monastery. It's a great big Orthodox Christian monastery. There's lots of monasteries in North America. That one's one of the biggest. It's in Arizona, just south of Phoenix, a couple hours. And go visit it sometime.
Gorgeous.
They're open for visitors. Do you know what the two biggest tourist attractions in Arizona are? One's the Grand Canyon. Do you know what number 2 is? A monastery. They get 30,000 visitors a year. So they're used to. Where is it? It's down by a town called Florence. So it's about an hour and a half, 2 hours south, and a little bit west of Phoenix.
Right next to a big prison.
Not too far from a big prison, yeah. So there's lots of monasteries. Now we don't necessarily call nuns nuns. For us, a nun is just a monk who happens to be a woman. A man's a monk who happens to be a man. A woman's a monk who happens to be a woman. They don't necessarily use the word nun, but they are separate. There's also a women's monastery in Arizona, and I would recommend any of the women to go there. It's my favorite. They only let me go there because I'm a priest. So that's a little perk. I get to go to women's monasteries. But the men's one is nice too.
Where's the women's?
Sanford, Arizona. Sanford. Sounds like Stanford, but it's no T. Sanford. But they do allow women to come visit. They do. Oh, you better wear a dress, and it better be long, and you've got to have a veil over your head, and long sleeves, and no cleavage showing. It's a men's monastery. Good question. Yes?
I have to leave.
Oh, go ahead,
I wanted
yeah.
to thank you. Your presentation was fascinating, and I hope you come back and do a second one.
Oh.
Seriously.
Well, if you have to leave, it's okay. But if there's any other questions, I'm going to hang around. Yes?
I just wondered about in the Catholic Church, where in the councils, the bishops decided in 2 different councils that Christ was God, and in the other one, that Mary was the mother of God. And so, how did the Serbians arrive at this? If they, this was Catholicism and their councils, how did?
Good question. Catholicism did not exist as an independent religion until after the year 1000. You did not have an independent Roman Catholic Church until after the year 1000. Serbia was initiated around the year 900. Orthodox Christianity, Eastern Christianity, is all of that church that was before the year 1000. An independent Roman Catholic Church did not exist until after the year 1000. Do you follow me?
Well, I do, but I don't understand how did they arrive at the same conclusions?
Well,
Because it seems to me that where we look at the Jewish people as not accepting Christ,
correct.
then the Christians did not accept Muhammad.
Correct. Orthodox Christianity, those councils in the 400s and 500s, the church got together and decided Christ is fully God and fully man. And then a little bit later they decided Mary is Jesus' mom. More specifically, they said she's the birth giver of God. That's your question. There was a heresy that said Christ wasn't born God, he became it later. That's a heresy. The whole church got together and said, she's the mother of God, which means she came out of the womb as God. So it's not so much a definition of Mary as it is of Christ, that he was fully God and fully man from the beginning, to put down that heresy. All that happened before Roman Catholicism was invented. In other words, why do I say that? There were 5 big cities. You've heard of Rome. Anyone heard of Jerusalem? Antioch? That's where they were first called Christians, by the way. Peter was the bishop of Antioch. He was never bishop of Rome. He just went to Rome to die. Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria. Have you heard of the Scrolls of Alexandria? And Constantinople, which was the biggest city in the world. Around the year 1000, Rome split from the other 4 and started an independent church separate from the other 4. That's a piece of history. The other 4 are still together today. That's the Orthodox Christian Church, They're still there. And they always have been since Jerusalem, so to speak. The new kid on the block who's separate, it's called the Great Schism around the year 1000, when East and West got split. So the East says we didn't invent anything new. Well, at least nothing newer than Jerusalem. And who's the lone man out? Rome. Separate from the other four. And it's only after that that the Roman Pope becomes infallible. Before that, they used to meet in councils, in groups. There was no one man infallible. So that early church, those councils you talk about, they were councils. There was not an infallible one, like there is in today's Roman Catholicism. Does that make a little sense?